Ubisoft just dropped a very exciting first gameplay reveal of Star Wars Outlaws, where we picked up our first look at how the game will work, including some really interesting details from the developers. So right now, I'm going to break down all the important info we know about the game so far, so you can decide if it's worth your time and attention. Now, Outlaws will be releasing in 2024 with no confirmed date as of yet, and will only be available on next-gen consoles, those being the Xbox Series X and S, the PS5, and of course the PC Master Race. It's also in development by Massive Entertainment, which was the studio behind the Division games, and Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora, which was also recently announced at Ubisoft Forward. Now, this is the very first ever open world Star Wars game which is single player only and does not have any multiplayer or co-op functionality. Incidentally, the game takes place in the time period between The Empire Strikes Back and The Return of the Jedi, which is bang in the middle of a civil war between the Galactic Empire and the Rebel Alliance, with the criminal underworld at its absolute peak as it takes advantage of all the chaos flying around currently in the galaxy, which is a pretty spicy setting for us to get involved in, as it does open up a lot of gameplay possibilities. But let's expand on the storyline premise a little bit more, because even though customization is in the game, which I will break down for you a little later on, you won't be able to create yourself per se in this open world game, as we follow the story of Vess, who Ubisoft describe as a cunning scoundrel and young thief that is seeking freedom and a better life from the suppression of the powerful crime syndicates and of course the Empire. Now, the narrative director, Navid Kavari, stated that when it comes to this scoundrel story, it really is exploring the journey of when Kay or you get to the point where you say enough is enough, because the majority of Kay's life is spent fighting, stealing, and outwitting her way through various hostile factions and becoming one of the galaxy's most wanted bandits. That's basically the crux of the game. In fact, the co-game director, Matthias Carlson, stated that this scoundrel story that Ubisoft are telling means that we're never in servitude to anyone, and that's why it is a great premise for an open world game, because we will be making our own choices in quests and choosing our own dialogue responses that then go on to have rippling effects throughout the rest of the game. And that's why Outlaws is different to Jedi Survivor, as this title is giving us a bit more of a free roam approach to the storyline and general gameplay, comparatively to a more Metroidvania platform styled game with utility gated exploration and progression that is essentially Jedi Survivor. Now, that said, it wouldn't be a Star Wars game without companions, and we pick up some here in Outlaws that we can go through and will assist us in day-to-day gameplay as well as in the main storyline, with Julian Geraghty, the creative director, noting that they will really propel the adventure and story forward in this game. The first major companion being Nyx, who is described as Kay's only family, which is a creature of the Merkel species, with his home planet currently remaining a mystery. And if you have played Star Wars Jedi Survivor recently, I would absolutely compare Nyx here to BD1, who will also play a significant role in terms of gameplay mechanics, as you can also see here, which I will break down for you a little later on, because our second additional companion that will be joining us throughout the game is ND5, who is a BX commando droid that was a veteran of the Clone Wars that has subsequently turned to the profession of enforcing on behalf of the Syndicate underworld. Now, we saw these BX commando droids in Jedi Survivor as a new enemy type who were quite challenging to defeat due to their vibro swords, which I do believe we get a quick glimpse of here in the trailer if I just zoom in on ND5. So I am very much looking forward to going into combat with him as our companion, as I reckon he will fulfill a solid tank or close quarters role whilst we gunsling from afar. Now, if you are enjoying the video, please do leave a very swift like down below. It genuinely really helps me out on YouTube, so thank you very much for your support. Now, I think it's safe to assume that this will be a huge game to explore, as it is a Ubisoft open world game after all, with Julian Geraghty, the creative director, stating that every planet we visit will have a distinct profile that has its own bespoke story, as well as wildlife and a living ecosystem that changes from location to location. And a good example of what he means here is this new moon called Tashara, which has been developed very closely with Lucasfilm, as it has its own local culture that is very distinctive from the different planets in the game, as well as unique vegetation and wildlife to discover. Incidentally, it's just one of the many worlds, which includes cities that can be explored by us in your own time and pace in game, navigating the complex relationships of all corrupt government officials and underworld activity. But that means you're not just restricted to one planet, of course. You can travel to others with the Trailblazer ship, which is a light freighter, and as Julian went on to say, it was super important to them to build this game where the experience of going from foot to your spaceship and then out of the atmosphere, as you can see here in this clip, is a seamless experience for the player. And as much as I would love a No Man's Sky mechanic with no loading screens and the ability to land and take off wherever we want, I think a fluid cutscene is definitely better than a stationary picture on a loading screen. Now, spaceships aside, we also pick up some noteworthy traversal and movement mechanics here in the game, with the speeder or swoop bikes being showed heavily in the gameplay showcase, which will certainly be one of our mount options in game when exploring these large planets. And I wouldn't be surprised if we can buy, customize, and partake in races as world events, which would be really cool to experience. A recent example of this actually being Hogwarts Legacy broom events in that game, which does seem to operate in a similar way here in terms of mechanics. And if we just zoom into this part of the screen, it seems that the speeder does have a boost meter available for us, which we can also see in action for a quick burst of speed to get us out of a bit of a pinch. I've also got my fingers crossed for some pod racing, as I absolutely love that game back in the day, so fingers crossed it's included here. But as for actual ground movement, all the usual mechanics are here, with crouching and stealth, which I'll get to shortly, as well as climbing objects, sprinting, and utilizing a grapple tool to get down from high platforms and presumably climb up them as well. And I'm looking forward to seeing a little bit more here in future installments, or previews I mean, such as the freedom to perhaps fly inside the atmosphere and perhaps more parkour features within the environment. Now, one of the mechanics I think I'm most excited about in this game is the reputation system, which has been loosely compared to Red Dead Redemption 2, in that the outcome of certain decisions you take in game will either benefit you directly or perhaps inadvertently cause you problems later down the line. A good example of this being the decision choice scenario we saw in the preview, where we can either buy off the Imperial agent, losing credits in the process, and go on our merry way, or we can tell them to do one where we keep our credits but subsequently end up being hunted by the Empire, which can cause us a bit of unnecessary grief. Now, Navid, the narrative director, notes that it will be crucial for us to decide what kind of reputation we want to build for ourselves with Kay, and how we approach these syndicates will then determine what kind of rewards we will earn due to the decisions that we decide to take. Whether that's a substantial amount of credits or priceless artifacts, it will be up to us. Now, if I just zoom in here on this clip, we can see our reputation with the Pike Syndicate decrease after dispatching quite a few of them, which I also imagine would not have happened if we had stealthed out of the compound without being seen. So it's clear we'll be able to build our reputation with different crime syndicates and the Empire in the game, which I think is a real big positive for me. And if we actually combine this reputation system with the wanted system, we've got ourselves a pretty interesting relationship mechanic across the whole game, because Julian Geraghty, the creative director, stated that the wanted system is something that will be forever present throughout the game, where if you continue to perform scoundrel activities and reach the most wanted level, the Empire will proactively throw a huge amount of resources our way, bad resources I mean, which will be difficult to consistently fend off. So it's best to avoid that as much as possible. That said, Julian did confirm there will always be options in the game that will allow you to de-escalate the wanted level you've reached. So you're not just standing around waiting for it to kind of drop off or tick off via the in-game timer, just like in GTA. And I imagine there will be a similar mechanic here to Assassin's Creed Mirage, another Ubisoft game, where we'll be able to remove wanted posters in that game specifically to reduce our notoriety level or wanted level more quickly. So you can do whatever you want in the game, it seems, similar to GTA, but expect some consequences and quest lines to be then locked temporarily if you decide to nuke a Syndicate enterprise while you chill on your couch on a Sunday afternoon. But speaking of combat, let's take a look at a few interesting details now, because our primary offensive weapon will be our blaster, with Matthias Carlson, the game director, going on to state that as we progress through the game, the blaster will evolve and improve. That will become a very versatile tool for more than just killing enemies at range. An example of this being where we see Kay change her blaster to focus mode by holding down the LB button, with Julian saying that there is different modules which we can discover in game and upgrade on our blaster that will then allow us to deal with situations differently in and out of combat, as well as improve the cooldown capacity of our weapon, which, as you can see here, does get too hot if we end up spamming the trigger too much, similar to a Star Wars Battlefront 2 mechanic if you've played that game. Additionally, combat on speeders is confirmed here, with perhaps another nod to a Red Dead styled mechanic with this Jedi Ultra move, which we can activate by pressing down on both controller joysticks and pretty much one-shot enemies. I also think this won't be just restricted to the speeder, but we'll also be able to use this on foot as well. Now, while we're on the topic of combat, let's actually go over some dogfighting details with our spaceship, where we'll be able to use our ship thrusters to boost in and out of tight, close quarters fighting, as well as utilize 5 offensive rockets and turrets when going toe-to-toe with enemy fighters. On top of that, it looks like we'll be able to repair our ship on the fly while in combat, similar to Star Wars Squadrons, with a health bar and ship shields to the right-hand side of that tab. But what was most exciting to see, in my opinion, was that we can use the ship's hyperdrive to jump our way out of the fighting by pressing the right D-pad button. The caveat being that we need to calibrate it, so pretty much wait for the timer or wait for it to load up and remain out of combat long enough to then utilize it. And I want to bring your attention to this section of the UI here, because it does seem that we can flick through our destination on the fly for a very quick fast travel option instead of opening up a planetary menu system and messing around with that, which I'm really actually a big fan of. I think that's a great mechanic to include in this game. Now, another thing I'm a big fan of actually is the option of stealth in this game, as well as how our companion Nyx integrates with that specifically. So by holding down our RB or R1 button on the controller, we get the option of sending Nyx to a tacker guard or interact with a environmental icon that subsequently allows us to continue in stealth and progress our mission without the need to unholster our weapon and enter combat. We can also send in Nyx to retrieve enemies' weapons and items whilst we're in combat, as you can see here, which I also think is a really nice detail to note. Now, the devs have said that there will be specific stealth missions on Star Destroyers, and I am interested to know if you can perhaps play the whole game undetected, and I will let you know if we hear any more on that. But as for customization, even though we can't create ourselves to look like Mando, which I would have loved, to be honest with you, we can utilize this workbench to customize Kay's weapons for upgrades, and I have no doubt that this is the place that we will change our outfits, actually, unless we can directly do it in the menus, but we'll just have to wait for a future deep dive from Ubisoft on those features. But that said, if you are new here, please do consider subscribing, as I will be covering Star Wars Outlaws from start to finish, including guides, tips and tricks, and news and updates, so it would be great to have you along for the ride. Do also check out this new Starfield breakdown video on your screen right now, which I think you'll find really interesting if you're interested in this game. And big thanks to Nika, my co-content creator, for making this video with me. It's not possible without her. Cheers for stopping by, and as usual, coffee is on me.